Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. I'm going to do a fairly quick video regarding heartthrob sex symbol Burt Reynolds and Hollywood Homicides, my forte. That's my main go-to video. It's either private banking, money laundering, or it's Hollywood Homicides, or of course, I haven't neglected private banker homicides, which are really my favorite. Roberto Calfi, Michele Sindona, Abigail Folger, Ines Mejia never got whacked. And so far, Paul Pelosi is still alive as far as I can tell. Now, if ever I saw a private banker that was involved with the clandestine services that maybe is past his shelf life, it would be Paul Francis Pelosi. He's looking a lot like Roberto Calfi did at age 62, or kind of like Michele Sedona looked like when he was in a women's prison at age 66. Or perhaps he looks kind of sort of like Noam Chomsky. Anyway, I don't really know what to tell you, but he's recovering from his hammer attack and skull fracture at the hospital that's geographically the furthest away from his Pacific Heights home, located at 2640 Broadway, Pacific Heights. Could have taken him to Presbyterian Pacific Medical Center, which would have taken approximately 3.5 minutes. But no, they took him very far away to the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital, which is a well-known CIA-controlled facility, and that is where the David Smith from the PhD from University of California, San Francisco, performed experiments on rats and mice using LSD and amphetamines as part of the CIA's amphetamine research project was run out of the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital. Back then, there was no Zuckerberg. He hadn't been born yet. Okay, but I can see that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Right, Paul Pelosi? Just like your father was a drug wholesaling dealer, and you're in the private banking business, and your son, Paul Pelosi Jr., we're not really sure what he does for a living. He wears a face diaper when he visits you over at the Zuckerberg Hospital. I saw that. So, kind of, sort of, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and it's good that we have Zuckerberg's name on that brick CIA bunker over there. All right, so let me see where I can start this story. In my Hollywood homicide video, which I did recently, I featured 10 homicides. I focused in on 3. Albert Decker, who was murdered in a bondage scenario situation, naked in his bathtub, handcuffed, with a ball gag in his mouth, with a noose around his neck attached to the curtain rod, which if you've ever attempted to hang anything that weighed significant amounts of kilos, I wouldn't recommend a curtain rod to hang yourself. But that's how it was presented when people entered the apartment. And that was called a suicide, which Thomas Noguchi was the medical examiner on that. I'm calling poppycock on that. That was on May 5th, 1968. Then the second Hollywood homicide was one of my favorite actors, Jack Cassidy, who appeared 3 times in Columbo murder episodes as the murderer. And he had been divorced from Shirley Jones for a couple years, and he was living alone by himself at 1121 North La Cienega Avenue, near Fountain Avenue. And that's in close proximity where Diane Linklater was murdered and where Connie Monte was murdered. It's about 650 meters to be precise. They were at 1121 North Horn, where they killed. They were killed at 1121 North Horn Avenue. And Jack Cassidy was killed at 1121 North La Cienega Avenue, 2 blocks away. It's just a coincidence. It's a lot of coincidences in my stories. Anyway, the media wrote it up that he left his cigarette lit on his Naugahyde leather sofa, and he was drunk, fell asleep on his couch, and then incinerated his body like he was cremated, which I think would have required chemicals to do the job that made him unrecognizable and required dental records to ID the body. And so I'm going to call poppycock on that. I'm calling that a murder. I'm calling that when the fire department arrives at 6:30 in the morning, I have a lot of hours of unaccounted for time when a drunken man in a stupor would fall asleep and pass out on his Naugahyde couch. Presumably that would be more like 2 o'clock in the morning when the bars close. It doesn't take 4 hours for an apartment to go up in a blaze if it is a incendiary device felony arson, which is what I'm going to call that. I'm going to call that a 6 a.m. felony arson, and that the story about the drunkenness and the cigarette is a poppycock mendacity, in the same way that the Paul Pelosi DUI misdemeanor car crash in Napa County was a poppycock story, and that the story where Paul Pelosi was in a vehicular felony manslaughter, killing his older brother, right? David John Pelosi, age 19, killed by a neck brace. Are you kidding me? Paul Pelosi, age 16, attending St. Ignatius High School, driving the car, speeding on Skyline Boulevard in San Mateo County, and they blame it on the neck brace? Let me get this straight. If you didn't crash the car, your brother wouldn't be dead, right? So how's the neck brace figuring the story? Why not blame the asphalt? Why not blame that there's not enough oxygen in the air? Why not blame COVID? I mean, you could have blamed COVID. I know it was 1957, but believe me, they had the COVID plan all planned out back in 1957. They had Operation Sea Spray, where they dropped toxic chemicals over the city of San Francisco in the early 1950s. And my entire life, every time I look up at the sky, I see chemtrails. So I know they had a plan to pollute the world in 1957 when your older brother was killed. You could have used that CIA plan to blame the murder on, but instead they blame a neck brace from a swimming accident. Anyway, we have that situation going on in my third murder, which was Inger Stevens, not her real name, right? And she was murder-suicided on April 30th, 1970, and Thomas Noguchi again does the autopsy, and he calls it the same thing that he called Marilyn Monroe, who he did the autopsy in her, acute barbiturate poisoning. So that's what killed Marilyn Monroe in 1962, and that's what killed Inger Stevens, age 35, in 1970, April 30th, 1970. The problem is that Burt Reynolds was dating her. Burt Reynolds is 18 months younger than Inger Stevens. Inger Stevens had had affairs with Bing Crosby and Anthony Quinn, so why not Burt Reynolds? I mean, she'd been married and divorced twice already, and she had a troubled childhood, and she went to the Actors Studio in New York City at around age 18. So there's a common theme here, because Burt Reynolds is coming out of his first marriage, where he divorces Judy Carn. Judy Carn, not a real name. It's Joyce Audrey Botterill. And Judy Carn, known for Laugh-In, the Sock It To Me girl. Remember Sock It To Me? Judy Carn appeared on Laugh-In 1968 through 1970. She was a popular British actress there. She did a lot of other things. She went to the RADA school, RADA, Royal Academy of Dramatic Acting. She went there at age 15. That's when Brian Epstein was there. Brian Epstein was at the Royal Acting Academy when Judy Carn was at the Royal Academy. That's right. That's what I said. Now, Brian Epstein is a little older, slightly older than Judy Carn, but they both were at the Dramatic Acting Academy in London, as was Peter O'Toole, as was Peter Finney, as was Susan York. So that's who was in London, which is sort of like the Actors Studio in New York. It's a CIA recruiting center, people. And this is where Brian Epstein, he had already been recruited into British intelligence because he was in the Royal Army, and he was a known homosexual who impersonated an officer in Piccadilly Circus, and he had to see a psychiatrist or else they'd have sent him to the stockade. which is where young men who impersonate officers go. And Brian Epstein agreed to play ball and see the psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist sent him to the RADA school, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Acting, right? That's where they polished Brian Epstein, who signed a management contract with the Beatles, who became the number one social engineering group in the world. And their manager was indoctrinated in the Royal Army at the Regency Park Armory, and then through the psychological programming and sent to RADA, Royal Academy for Dramatic Acting. That is where Judy Carne was. That is where Peter Finney was. That's where Peter O'Toole was. That is where Susan York was in 1954, 1955. And guess who joins the party in 1956? None other than one of the stars of today's video, Sarah Miles. Sarah Miles had a troubled childhood, and she's sent to RADA at age 15. She's a little younger than the names I mentioned. And she's sent there in 1956 at age 15. There's a common theme. A little girl with a daddy complex sent to the RADA school in London at age 15. And there she is. She has an older man complex. As is, I don't know that it's a complex. It's just sort of required that that's what these young girls do. They marry older men. That's what Inger Stevens did. That's what Sarah Miles did. That's what they all do. So it's just sort of how it goes. That's what Natalie Wood did. I mean, Robert Wagner was 9 years older than her when she was 18 years old when she married him. She was 19 when she married him. 19. So he's 28. And he's already sleeping in her bed for the last year when she's 18, living in Laurel Canyon on Woodrow Wilson Drive. So the story of Inger Stevens was the last person to see her alive was Burt Reynolds. April 30th, 1970. Ruled a suicide. So it's fast forward. The next year, Burt Reynolds hits the jackpot with Deliverance. Deliverance in 1972 is released in 1972, but he's got to start filming that picture not too long after Inger Stevens' suicide. So I think that Burt Reynolds breathed a sigh of relief, that he wasn't considered a murder suspect, and he goes right on to film Deliverance, which is his single best film. I mean, his funniest film is Smokey and the Bandit, I think. I mean, he did a lot of funny films, but Smokey and the Bandit would be my favorite comedy film for Burt Reynolds, but my favorite film, dramatically, would be Deliverance, right? About the Tennessee Valley Authority and damming up those beautiful valleys in the Appalachian Mountains, and I guess flooding out all those redneck, inbred hillbilly type people. It's a great film. Anyway, so now Burt Reynolds is a big blockbuster star. So if there was a reason to help out Burt Reynolds in case there was a dead girl in his bed, that has escalated because now Burt Reynolds is big time. He's going to do a Playboy, Playgirl centerfold interview eventually. That's coming up. But he is big time Hollywood. He's 36 years old, and he is booked to star in a silly film with a cast and crew in Arizona. And I forgot to write down the name of the silly film that they're doing. But it's a humdinger. So let's see here. Just to run through some of Burt Reynolds' work leading up to this, he started out in Gunsmoke. He did Hawk, Dan August. Later, doing Dan August around the time that Inger Stevens was murdered. That was what he was working on. Again, he's 18 months younger than Inger Stevens, but they had a Burt Reynolds has a reputation of having a hot temper and being jealous and losing his cool. He was in Navajo Joe, 100 Rifles. Yeah, but his breakthrough role, like I said, was after Inger Stevens was murdered, Deliverance in 1972. And he plays a lovable rogue. And then Smokey and the Bandit follow. But the film that I wanted to tell you about, darn these people, they don't show it. So that's really annoying. All right, let me just go to Sarah Miles, because they do report it under Sarah Miles, who's his co-star. All right, The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing, 1973 was when it was released. Okay. So Burt Reynolds, big star. He is then cast with Sarah Miles, who's married to a 17-year older man by the name of Robert Bolt. He's a British actor. He's a British screenwriter and also playwright in England. And I guess he doesn't travel with his wife, who has now been integrated into the Hollywood cult and leaving her husband back home. Now, Sarah Miles married and divorced, married Robert Bolt twice. She divorced him. She was married 1967 through 1976. So she was married to Robert Bolt when this murder comes down in Arizona involving Burt Reynolds, who's the star, and Sarah Miles, who's age... Sarah Miles is age 32. And Burt Reynolds is divorced Judy Carn, who's age 34. Burt Reynolds is 36. He's going to be 37. He has his birthday during the filming of this, The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing. So, I don't know why, but Sarah Miles, age 32, has a personal manager who's 26 years old by the name of David Whiting. Now, David Whiting has kind of a sketchy background. He's only 26 years old. Is he really competent to manage a 32-year-old woman from, you know, a theatrical background who's married to a much older man who's, you know, successful with the BBC? I don't know. But he's there, and there's 40 cast and crew members, and they're in the town of Gila, Arizona, and it is a very small town, and there's really only one hotel in that town. It's the Travel Lodge, and the entire cast and crew of this movie, The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing, they're all staying at the Travel Lodge. So it's one big happy family after work. So I'm sure alcohol is involved in this story. Now, the particular day I'm talking about is February 11th, 1973. And this is Burt Reynolds' birthday. It's his 37th birthday. And they had a birthday party for Burt Reynolds at the set. And I'm sure the weather was pretty good. Now, this particular place is one of the hottest places in Arizona. It's often featured on the weather reports as the barometer of how hot it can get in Arizona. But, of course, this is February, so we're not in that kind of a situation. So it's probably a very pleasant day. And anyway, like I said, Burt Reynolds had a party, and Sarah Miles, his co-star, attended the party, and then she goes back to her room, and Burt goes wherever he goes. And the way the story reads is that David Whiting, her personal manager, knocked on Sarah Miles' door with attempts to have sex with her, and she fought him off and complained, and then called Burt. And the story, I don't have the story straight, but that's okay, because Burt Reynolds doesn't have the story straight either. And Sarah Miles doesn't have the story straight either, because both Sarah Miles and Burt Reynolds told the police, who arrived when David Whiting's dead body was on the floor with blood and lots of cuts and bruises on his face. And they called it a suicide by barbiturates, you know, like they called Inger Stevens' death, like they called Marilyn Monroe's death. That's what they called David Whiting, age 26, that his death was suicide because Sarah Miles broke up with him. Well, first of all, they have a business relationship, not a romantic one. She's married to Robert Bolt. How can she have a relationship with David Whiting? She's married, and he's her manager. And she's 26, and she's 32. So that part of the story doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter. When they get back to Hollywood, a very expensive law firm is hired to represent Sarah Miles and Burt Reynolds both. And then the narrative changes to, I don't know what's going on. We don't know what happened. And basically the guy was no good, and he just took a lot of pills and committed suicide. So I'm going to call poppycock on that story. I don't know anything about the facts of this case, but I can tell you right now that Burt Reynolds admitted to the police in Arizona, the sheriff, that he took the bottle of pills and removed it from the room, and that he walked all over the Travelodge motel room and destroyed evidence. He admits that to the sheriff's department. So that kind of sort of makes Burt Reynolds, who's, you know, a big-time dramatic acting star of Deliverance, makes him sort of look like he's complicit in a murder, right? Anyway, they got back to Hollywood, and Hollywood fixed it. So it was ruled a suicide, and I'm told that the Arizona Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney's Office believed that Burt Reynolds beat this guy to a pulp, and that's what killed him, and not the barbiturates, which were probably fed into him after he was beaten up. But we can't prove it. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I don't know if Sarah Miles knows what happened. But I do find that this lead that I have here came from one of my astute viewers at BitChute, who chimed in that he thought that he heard that Burt Reynolds beat somebody senseless and they died, and he got away with murder. And there are articles at Esquire and other magazine tabloids that talk about, it sounds like maybe Burt Reynolds murdered this guy, David Whiting, and he was never charged. He was never arraigned. He was never convicted of murder. Hey, nobody was ever convicted of murdering Sharon Tate other than the wrong persons, right? Because the real killer of Sharon Tate got away with it. The real killer of Abigail Folger got away with it. The real killer of Paul Stein, yellow cab driver, killed in Nancy Pelosi and Paul Pelosi's neighborhood in Presidio Heights in 1969, they got away with it. The murderer of Paul Stein, the yellow cab driver, he got away with it. He was never arrested, never arraigned, never convicted of murdering Paul Stein with a 9mm pistol, walking distance from Officer Housing, where Sharon Tate's father lived, where Michael Aquino ended up living, right? That was before the Pelosi's moved to Pacific Heights, about a mile to the east, on Broadway. You know, where Enos Mejia lived, Abigail Folger's mother. Where Melvin Belli lived, you know, the guy that made sure that Jack Ruby got convicted of killing Lee Oswald, which I'm not sure he killed him. I think they might have killed him at Parkland Hospital, right? Put that guy down. All right, so I just wanted to thank you very much to my BitChute viewers. Thank you for participating. Thank you for giving me this lead on Burt Reynolds. I would have completely missed this. I didn't know that Burt Reynolds was the last person to see Inger Stevens alive, and also one of the last people to see David Whiting alive before his death was ruled a suicide by acute barbiturate poisoning. That's 2 for 2. Burt Reynolds, the last people he saw, Inger Stevens, age 35, and David Whiting, age 26, dead by suicide barbiturates. What's the mathematical possibility that could ever happen in real life? Well, it's 0. No, it's not. It couldn't happen in real life. But in Hollywood Homicides, Jack Cassidy can leave an errant cigarette burning, and it has a delayed 4-hour reaction, and then it engulfs his entire apartment and cremates him to where they need dental records to ID him, and doesn't harm any of the apartment neighbors. It's crazy, right? In all of my Hollywood Homicides, the cover stories are really silly. They're ridiculous. They're ridiculous. What is plausible is never discussed in the media. That's why this hammer attack by Paul Pelosi, or the Paul Pelosi hammer attack story, there's nothing true about it. I mean, they're going to call it a lunatic, January 6th, insurrectionist. Insurrectionist of what? We have a bank-controlled, fascist-controlled government with a minister of propaganda that tells you what the truth is. And they don't want to go anywhere near the truth. So everything's poppycock. We have a propaganda minister of poppycock television network, and they're going to tell you that some naked guy or in his underwear with a hammer magically entered a CIA-controlled home, 2640 Broadway, and hit Paul Pelosi in the head. And the police officers have, chest cameras, but we don't have the video on that. So we can't confirm anything. Somebody answered the front door, don't know who. Someone called the 911, for the DUI car crash in Napa County. We don't have the 911 call on that. So there's a lot of concealment with the Pelosis. Just like the John Kennedy assassination. They won't release the files. Because, look, it's a controlled event. All right? This guy, this David LaPoppe character, if that's his real name, he's a cutout. He's just somebody they're going to throw under the bus. They're going to use him for political purposes. But nothing about Paul Pelosi is real. He's in the concealment business. That's what private banking is. Private banking makes Paul Pelosi a spook. And that's what makes the chief of police of San Francisco a spook. He's the chief of police of a CIA city. So that makes you a spook. If you're the district attorney of San Francisco, you work for CIA. If you're the district attorney of Los Angeles County, you're CIA. Just like Evil Younger was when he railroaded Sirhan Sirhan. When he railroaded Charlie Manson. Not his real name, Charlie Scott. When Evil Younger, CIA, railroaded him. When Ronald Reagan, CIA-controlled governor of California, was governor, Charlie Manson was railroaded. When Gavin Newsom, who's related to Paul Pelosi, he's going to supervise over the cover-up of the California Highway Patrol communications to deal with Paul Pelosi in his 911 Porsche Carrera, which can go 200 miles per hour and 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds. What residence was he coming from? Who was he with? Was there a person in the car that fled the scene, that left a scene of a felony, because it was a felony, later changed to a misdemeanor? That's clandestine services. That's the Napa County District Attorney Office being controlled by the invisible hand. Obviously. And if you don't believe me, go crash a car on State Highway 29 and take out a 48-year-old Latino man and destroy $250,000 of the property and see what happens to you. When you have a blood alcohol rating that requires that you can't stand up without both hands on the hood of the CHP cruiser. Because that video is available. You can Google the Paul Pelosi California Highway Patrol video from the dashboard camera, and you will see the Paul Pelosi is falling down drunk. How many fingers am I holding up, Paul? I think he passed that. He flunked everything else. Like touch your nose. Which nose? I mean my nose that's on my ear? All right, so anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for listening. Hit the like and subscribe. Have a great rest of your week.